What's up, y'all? It's Ty, and we're going to be looking at Tim Duncan today in the Greatest Peak series, man. Shout out to Thinking Basketball. This series is probably, honestly, one of the better series I've ever watched on YouTube or just in general. And it's cool for me to go back in time and look at how great each and every player was. Tim Duncan, I mean, I caught the very end of his career, but even then I wasn't super into basketball. So I'm eager to see what Tim Duncan was like at his prime, a dominant big man.
In this,
shout out to Thinking Basketball, man. If you don't watch his videos, you're doing something wrong. And also, if you are new here, man, please smash that subscribe button. I really do appreciate every single one of y'all.
series, we've seen two types of big men. The first anchored the defense while playing a kind of co-pilot role on offense. The second dominated with their team's attack orbiting around their incredible scoring. Which brings us to the final great big man in this series. Was Tim Duncan more of an offensive centerpiece, or did his crafty low-post scoring game and suffocating interior defense make him the very best of the two-way big men?
You are watching what greatness.
Great series, man. It's a great series. Timmy D, let's get it.
Timmy will hit you in phrases. Got you. Ooh, almost. This the worst right here. Nice try.
Duncan is easily the best modern defender never to win Defensive Player of the Year.
That's crazy. He never won it. I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Teammate Bruce Bowen is actually the only player with a larger share of votes over the years to never claim the award. And like great defensive centers before him, Tim's value comes from protecting the most important real estate in the game, the space right in front of the hoop. I've never seen any public record of his actual wingspan, but Duncan was long. He was around 7 feet without shoes and had the arms of a weeping willow tree. This is one of the reasons he blocked so many shots out of a shooter's hand. He had great feel and timing when targeting attempts like this.
Even there, he mistimed his jump and it doesn't matter.
Kenyon Martin is auditioning for the role of Charles Smith here until Kevin Willis ruins it with a foul.
They called a foul on that? That's soft.
Here, Devin George is overcome with the wild idea to baptize Duncan, and notice Timmy used that off arm again to slow down George and feel out the block.
Timmy.
This time it's Rob Ory trying him, and Duncan takes a big step and again uses his off arm to brace against him, and that swimmer's reach can do the rest.
He's got nowhere to go.
His strength helps this style of shot contesting because he doesn't need to load up to jump. He plows through his man here and probably catches Kobe by surprise, and the big fundamental likely caught plenty of shooters off guard because he kept his hands down when he moved, then typically brought them up when jumping like this, so he was always under control when sliding over to help in the paint.
It is crazy how he keeps his hands so low until they actually go up for the
steady
shot.
Body control allowed him to challenge threats in the lane and then immediately recover into a second challenge, which is one of the perks of a more floor-bound approach because he never jumped himself out of a play. Again, you'll see his hands are down, ready to jump, but he stays locked and loaded, and his windmill arms meant he could swivel from one threat to the next because his rim protection was less about leaping and more about timing and that ant-like standing reach. Duncan's block percentage during the playoffs in these seasons wasn't too far from the all-time greats, although his numbers were suppressed slightly by playing next to another center. When the Spurs went Twin Towers, there was about a 15% reduction in his block rate. Of course, keeping his hands down and not out meant he rarely deflected.
The fact that he and D-Rob were on the same team together, do y'all realize defensively, like at the rim, how tough that is? Like, or offensively, playing against them, what are you supposed to do?
And that made it a touch easier to slip them around him. Another key to Duncan's paint defense was his positioning. He'd sag into the lane an extra step or two, so he didn't have to go far to meet penetrators. Again, note the body control to stay down, and he barely needs to jump to swat it. He could stand one step into the lane using the classic toe-tapping technique to avoid 3 seconds, and that cut down the distance to help off the weak side. Here he slaps his hips in disagreement, A rare move in a deep bag of protestations, some of which were more animated, and some of which were more subtle performance art. Although,
I still can't believe he got ejected from that one game.
Personal favorite is the incredulous stare.
I'll bet you money on that one.
I don't bet anything. I'll go for a hamburger.
I'll bet you a hamburger.
You got it.
Speaking
Imagine if you were to say that to a ref now.
of reactions, Duncan's weren't always lightning quick. George is free here before he goes, but he's so well positioned it takes one step to protect the rim, and there was usually a tiny delay before he started sliding, and the third time was not the charm for Devin. TD usually...
Devin George, man. Give me a thinking basketball episode on him, the way he attacks the rim.
arrived on time, but sometimes that minor delay in reaction speed led to a bucket. But he also didn't need nanosecond processing because he was such a big presence, and a quick step toward the ball handler heavily influenced drives. He was even long enough to throw off floaters from skilled guards. In general, Duncan was aware of most threats. After some creative screening, he slides toward the action here, then realizes he needs to help on the roll man, and that is a tough make.
Sean Bradley, man, inspirational.
Here's another storm of ball screens by the offense, and he plugs up the first roller, realizes he needs to recover to the second screen, and smothers the ball handler in a great team sequence. Duncan was part of a unit that choked off opponents at the rim, holding them well below league average on these high-value attempts. The Spurs were most successful with two centers out there, but even with Duncan as the lone middleman, they defended the paint incredibly well, and in general thrived behind a defensively oriented roster. This is also where Greg Popovich established himself as an all-time coach.
I mean, if you have Tim Duncan, one of the best paint defenders, D-Rob, and then Bruce Bowen, I mean, like, what? It's cheating, basically.
Throwing in a zone every once in a while to throw off opponents, and instilling airtight schemes. The Spurs switch this pick and roll because Amari Stoudemire is mismatched with a wing, then Duncan can pick up Amari behind the play, and Manu Ginobili is down in a driving gap, and the whole thing's a clinic. The consistent implementation of these principles was impressive. A big shows on the pick and roll here, which means the other big in the paint slides to cover the roller, and wings were always prioritizing paint help. Bruce Bowen is sealing inside Duncan's man, and then the rotations quickly follow, and it leads to a low percentage shot.
Even look at Tim Duncan get out there and contest on the perimeter, man.
With Ginobili and Tony Parker yet to enter their primes, that Spurs roster was lighter on offensive parts, and instead featured defensive studs like Bowen and an aging Admiral, who had his moments in spurts. All of this made the Spurs a defensive dynasty, posting some of the best multi-year stretches of regular season and playoff defense in league history.
That's crazy that they were so good overall and better in the playoffs.
Was practically elite without Duncan, holding teams nearly 4 points below league average from 2001 to 2004 with him on the bench. With Duncan protecting the paint as an anchor, the Spurs became an all-time defense.
Look at him taking charges, too.
Had the
Is that Devin George again?
Ability to plug up breakdowns with fantastic saves like this. However, he did have some blind spots in his vision, meaning he couldn't always locate the ball instantly or anticipate danger at all.
That reminds me of the Kyrie play in the playoffs, like where Jason Tatum drove and kicked it to Jaylen Brown in the corner and Kyrie got lost.
Times.
It's easy to do, though.
He just completely misses this slip play that Utah liked to bust out on occasion. And he could have a little tunnel vision while on the move. This cut isn't really going anywhere, but he zones out and misses the back door. And this is almost identical to a play from last episode, where Robinson helps in front of Duncan, only Tim doesn't slide over to cover Robinson's man until it's too late, and there's no heroic save. Duncan played these until it's too late, and there's no heroic save.
What, because the off arm?
Duncan played these Spurs pick and roll
scheme. That's a horrible call.
Reasonably well, showing then recovering to his man, but he was particularly effective sagging off the dribbler.
Thing is, like, Duncan's not even quick or fast, and he's still good.
Using his length to bother pull-up jumpers. Even far out on the perimeter, his never-ending arms caught shooters off guard. And since he was mobile enough to venture out a bit and use
I mean, he's mobile enough, but he's not like KG mobile.
that size to keep ball handlers at bay, he was well suited for sagging, dropping coverages against pick and rolls. His lateral movement wasn't really a strength, and he was slightly vulnerable on the outside to quickness.
Oh my gosh.
This play, he's supposed to slow down the ball.
Kobe,
The
man.
sharp change of direction leaves him in Kobe's wake, and that whole Twin Towers thing was so effective back then. Now,
Imagine Kobe. You get past Tim Duncan, all for D-Rob just to be sitting waiting
well,
for you. It's
Duncan's
crazy.
mobility wasn't great. He was slow to decelerate, for instance. He wasn't a liability moving around the floor during that era. While he could be beaten by quicker players when guarding the ball, it was rare for big men at the time to face up on the perimeter and attack him with speed off the bounce.
Oh my, KG.
If anything,
Look at KG.
the slower,
Anti-Wolves.
more interior-based game amplified some of TD's man defense, where his length could really bother opponents who couldn't stretch him to the outside. He was also really strong enough not to be completely manhandled by Shaq himself. Of course, that didn't work every possession. I'm convinced flopping was the only way to actually slow down O'Neal. So, just like we've seen from most of the big men in
I'm
this
just stunned. Look, like Shaq's just he's huge,
series,
man.
Duncan's defense was an enormous value add. The bigger question, though, is just how valuable was an offense run through Tim Duncan.
That's what I want to get into.
Tim Duncan.
Yo, Tim. The week of greatness is back at Foot Locker.
Look at D-Rob.
No way. That's insane. I'm bouncing off the wall.
Never gets this excited.
I can't contain myself. I just knocked over a plant celebrating.
In contrast to the guard-like approach we saw last episode from Kevin Garnett, Duncan's offensive game was rooted deep in the paint like a traditional center. Unlike old-school centers, he was skilled enough to attack from the perimeter. He could face and drive all the way to the hole, but
a good
wherever he
move.
started, Duncan was often grinding closer to the basket with his strength. Because he was a contemporary of Shaq, few people talked about just how strong Timmy was, but he often worked for deeper position and powered into his points.
It's a great entry
At
pass.
260 pounds, he could hold this low position on the block and then swim into a move with force. Notice how he dislodges his defender with his shoulder to create space for the shot. And he would lead with his arms on these little half hooks and turning push shots. Watch closely. He swivels into Ori and throws his arms straight up through Ori's left arm.
It's like I've seen Kristaps do this a lot. Kristaps obviously is weaker, but I've seen him do it a
Arm
lot.
into the release. This takes great hand strength and turns his off arm into a shield. Again, backing down closer, and even though his man is sitting on the shot, he flares that left elbow for protection. All of these deliberate, churning moves require incredible balance and sturdiness. He sort of pushes the defender with the ball before going through him, which takes a Velcro grip. And this technique naturally led to the rip-through foul, where Duncan picked up a bunch of extra free throws anytime his opponent's arms were down or when they reached for an exposed ball and missed. Free throws were a big
His
part
strength is
of
crazy,
Duncan's
though.
scoring prowess. His 3-year peak in free throw attempts falls in the 98th percentile historically, and unlike Shaq, that served as an efficiency booster since Duncan shot 70% from the line.
I feel like I thought Tim Duncan shot better than 70. 70's
Much
like
of
okay, but it's not
His
great.
scoring was about methodically inching closer to the rim. Occasionally he'd try that
One
up and
Shaq.
under, and sometimes he'd throw in this power spin move where he's squeezing the ball in a vise. You'll notice he was rarely off balance, so when he spins away from the double team, all his weight is over that right leg, which helps him finish through contact. When his avenues to the hoop were cut off, he liked a little turnaround over his left shoulder, and like so many great post scorers,
just
he could
tough.
also wheel into this same turnaround over his other shoulder, although unlike many right-handed players, it was rarer to see him turn off this shoulder. There's a rip-through attempt again, and I wonder if he was more comfortable shooting these turning left because he could use that off arm to clear out a contesting hand.
I'm not an ambi-turner.
Of course, because it was a Tim Duncan move, he would jab step and fake his way into a little kiss off the glass every once in a while. Now,
the touch is
where
insane.
have I seen that before?
Look at Big Red.
Duncan's bank shot wasn't actually a huge part of his game. He called on it whenever he was facing the basket at an angle like this, but the banker was merely a component of his larger face-up attack, which involved little pull-ups on the baseline or in the middle of the floor even.
His shot looks so
Duncan
pure.
wasn't actually a strong outside shooter, making about 38% of his shots
I was
beyond
gonna say he shot bad from the free throw line.
15 feet during these seasons, which landed him in the bottom third of the league at the time. I don't know how much more accurate he was going to the bank on these attempts. He was certainly comfortable jab stepping and then playing it off the window, but this was still a flat stroke with a hitch. Some of these were straight out of the Adrian Dantley school of rhythmic up-faking. The shot was threatening enough to open up driving lanes where he could pump fake repeatedly.
It's like, if you're a defender and you know he's not a great shooter, why even go for the up fake? Just get a hand up
reacted and
be
then
fine.
head downhill. There's that strength and body control to take contact from Shaq
That's on
while
Shaq,
decelerating.
too.
Despite
impressive.
his shooting struggles, Duncan actually had some nice touch on these slow motion rumbles to the rim. He wasn't the quickest, but he was always under control and dexterous enough to flip in all kinds of little shots. His face-up game was aided by a tight handle that let him put his head down and go. He didn't have the change
to me, it's crazy at 7 feet how well these guys can handle the ball, man. It's
of
impressive.
direction to unlock a variety of dribble moves, but he was secure enough to barrel through players on drives like this. We saw a svelter Kevin Garnett struggle to hold that
I'm
line
gonna
last
say he's stronger than KG, a lot stronger. Not as quick though.
episode. All of Duncan's high percentage shot attempts and free throws made him a strong playoff scorer during these
26
seasons,
per game.
stacking up well against most big men historically, save for the best of the very best. Using these playoff numbers, he looks far closer to Olajuwon than to someone like Walton as a scoring hub, but there's a little more to the story. When Duncan faced stronger defenses, his scoring wasn't quite as potent, dropping off more than many of the modern greats. And he
Oh
had
my
similar
gosh, that's like almost
struggles in the
6.
postseason. He just didn't play many elite defenses, in part because
I
the
guess
Spurs
so did Karl Malone and D-Rob though.
were so good. By the way, like Hakeem, Duncan took up basketball later than most. He was a 13-year-old swimmer in the Virgin Islands when he started, and because of
That's
that late
crazy.
start,
It's so crazy. A lot of like the big men, man, they don't even pick up a basketball until really late in their lives. It's
he
crazy.
said he didn't feel he was ready for the NBA after his junior year at Wake Forest, when he would have been the #1 pick in the draft. This lack of experience might have been a reason why he started with some fuzzy court vision, but he was always an eager student and willing passer, and in time he figured out what to look for as an offensive
That was
hub.
a great pass.
He learned passing reads that allowed the Spurs to stream a ton of their offense through him. They could dump it to Timmy in the post and have him attack help by kicking it to a three-point shooter, or he could wait for the double and find a teammate cutting. This should look familiar. It's the same kind of inside-out offense that we saw with Olajuwon's Rockets and O'Neal's Lakers.
Man, the Spurs had shooters.
On this one, he patiently allows the defense to commit
and
near
it's so nice to see the Spurs actually shooting 3-point shots.
the baseline, so the basic kickout is open, and man, Ginobili made some big plays in 2003. This is the exact same set we just saw, only the help comes off the cutter to the corner, so Duncan fires it there nicely for a wide open
Long
look.
two for what?
And his towering height helped him move through these progressions, with high, quick releases when he spotted an open cutter. He even flashed another Walton move, the little jump
I think it's so impressive when big men can pass out of the post like this. It just puts so much pressure on the defense.
in tight quarters, creating an even better angle for an express shipment. His best, most consistent passes were probably these structured reads from the post to cutters or shooters, and
Another
estimates of
long
shot
two.
creation peg him slightly behind someone like Kevin Garnett. Velocity helped the big fundamental because he didn't really throw to openings before they emerged. That could have been a touch earlier, And sometimes
Still a
that made a
great finish.
difference. A key to hitting tight windows is to anticipate movement, and here there's a lag and he's not ready to snap it over, and by then it's too late. When he could see a pass in front of him, he could drop some lovely dimes. Robinson's in his line of sight here, and those huge hands make the magic happen.
I'm not gonna lie, the fact that D-Rob caught that that's impressive. Like, that's a tough angle.
Speaking of magic, he was a favorite of Duncan's growing up, and so Timmy always wanted to freestyle like a guard in transition, and there's a Johnson-inspired look away.
At 7
He still
feet
had
doing
blind
this.
spots at his peak, openings in his periphery could go unnoticed. Here's another one where the cut starts out of the corner of his eye, but he's kind of locked into his bank shot dance. Sometimes it felt like once he committed to a movement, there was no going back. He starts throwing this pass without adjusting for the defender, even though his teammate did, and I think Duncan had more of these glitchy-looking turnovers than most superstars. However, slow
But you just
adjustments
can't turn the ball over in those type of situations.
don't mean slow actions.
Oh my
And he could
gosh.
certainly map the floor in front of him when he had a second to process it, and then move the ball quickly. To my eye, he was most comfortable with quick reads out of set pieces, where he knew what to look for, like in a short roll situation with a teammate in the dunker spot.
That could have been an offensive foul, I'm not gonna
He
lie.
had nice chemistry with Robinson in particular, especially
Honestly, this is what the Timberwolves thought they had in Cat and Rudy.
on passes.
How do I
from the
tell the T-Wolves, man? And I love the T-Wolves, but how do I tell them?
top?
How do I tell them? Cat's not Tim Duncan, and Gobert offensively surely isn't D-Rob.
There was a kind of big-to-big simpatico with these lobs to the Admiral, and they even ran a little twin tower pick and roll with the court spaced. Unfortunately,
like Cat and
those were
Rudy.
very rare, but it wasn't rare for Duncan to hop along with his front court mate, synchronized swimming style. Finally, the big fundamental could snap off some brisk outlets, and he would even try to throw these over the top when the opportunity presented itself, which was a nice fit with smaller players who like to get out and run in
Great
transition.
pass.
Much like Walton's Blazers, San Antonio's Duncan-centric attacks produced pretty good results, but they certainly weren't a team powered by offense, finishing about 2 points ahead of the league on that end from 2001 to 2003.
I mean, it's still not bad, though, especially if defensively they were fantastic.
Ironically, the 03 title team was one of the weakest Spurs teams of Duncan's prime. But a theme of this series is the difference between building an offense around a big man versus a team around a big man. Like Walton, Garnett, and Robinson, Duncan's two-way impact made him a superstar, and on those teams, his post-up game was a perfect fit for a defensively slanted roster that was supercharged by Duncan's paint protection. Because of this, he has some legendary plus-minus stats during these seasons, posting the second largest point differential on record when he was on
Did
the
y'all see the
court
on-off
compared
court?
to when he was
Oh
off
my
the court,
gosh.
trailing
27?
only his teammate David Robinson from the preceding 3 years.
Who is like their backup guy here? Like, I feel like they're outliers.
Well, Robinson and Duncan reinforce the incredible value of defensive studs who are offensive all-stars. It gives me some pause that the top two numbers came from the same team in back-to-back periods.
That's what I'm
There's
saying.
plenty of noise in 50 games of plus-minus data, and Duncan's surrounding stretches do look drastically different. There were nagging injuries in those following years, but his scoring numbers remain the same. Part of the plus-minus drop-off was probably San Antonio growing less dependent on his offense as players like Parker and Ginobili emerged. The Spurs became a
It
very
makes sense, especially
good
offensively.
playoff offense in the mid-2000s, and while Duncan certainly wasn't a poor fit, his brand of slower, high-viscosity post-scoring doesn't scale up that well. Methodical isolation scoring can lift a team's offensive floor, but it's hard to be a great co-pilot with that approach. His lack of outside shooting limited some of his
Such a
off-ball
tough
value.
shot.
He could splash in jumpers off a pick and pop, but he just wasn't that efficient on these. He was a far better roll man, where he could catch and finish through contact near the rim, and he was mobile enough to take a dribble and adjust at the hoop. And this kind of off-ball game is a key to blending in on better and better offenses. He added more value with his offensive rebounding game, although they were often grabbing his own misses, which was
Moses Malone
also
style.
a byproduct of his power scoring, constantly trying to press forward toward the basket. This is kind of like a lighter version of what we saw from Shaq in episode 9. You can also see how crazy long Duncan is here, barely jumping to reach 10 feet. This overall combination of scoring, shot
I will say, like, just the post-up game in general, it's just, if you have a lot of offensive players, it's not the most efficient brand. It's just not. I mean,
blocking
it's the
and
same way
plus
nowadays.
minus data gave Peak Duncan some of the best impact
This is
metrics
nuts.
on record.
Impact.
And while they might overstate his value, they also drive home how valuable his archetype can be, where Duncan's low post scoring and playmaking can help weaker offenses reach respectable heights, while at
the same time being great defense.
same time driving them to contention with huge impact on defense.
That's my thing.
And that same package can turn a solid team into a title favorite, which is exactly why Tim Duncan's two-way impact gave him one of history's greatest peaks.
And Tim Duncan was good for a while, man. He was good. Obviously, the Spurs had a dynasty back then, but, I mean, that team, if I was, loving basketball back then, would have been a team I would have, I don't think hated. Maybe I would have because they were the best, but I don't know. I mean, Tim Duncan, his impact, I mean, it's undeniable, especially on the defensive end of the court. Was surrounded by a lot of talent in his career, though. That's going to wrap it up for our video, guys. Let me know your thoughts on it down below in the comments. Drop a like on it. Subscribe if you're new. And as always, man, I love you guys. Have a blessed day.